All right, so let's turn in our Bibles to Galatians chapter 5, beginning with verse 22. And this is the Fruit of the Spirit sermon series. And even though this is the last fruit of the Spirit, doesn't mean this is the last sermon. I've actually got a couple more. I've got one to wrap things up. And I found another fruit, which is kind of interesting. It's called the fruit of light. So I thought that would be kind of neat just to kind of throw in there with this Fruit of the Spirit sermon series. So I look forward to that. And then we'll have one that'll just kind of wrap everything up in a nice little bow, and we can kind of move on to our next sermon series. But Galatians 5, beginning with verse 22, it says, "The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." And a lot of your translations, it's temperance. It will be temperance, but it means the same thing. So we're going to get into that here in a little bit. It says the law is not against such things. So today we're going to be talking about temperance or self-control. And in the Greek, the word is enkratia. Enkratia. And in the Hebrew, the word for temperance or self-control is zenut. And obviously it means temperance and self-control, but it also means chastity. And if you think of chastity, you also think of self-control, especially of one's sexual urges. That's usually where the word chastity is applied in that instance. Now, these Greek and Hebrew words for self-control and temperance also implies being even-keeled and consistent. In other words, being balanced. And I've met very few people in my life that I can say that every time I meet them, they're just the same. They're even-keeled, they're balanced. There's this one guy that went to our church when I was a young guy, and he played bluegrass music. But he was always the same. No matter when you met him, he always looked the same, always had a smile on his face, no matter what was going on in his heart and his life and his mind. And, you know, he had a pretty rambunctious son. And he was kind of like Dennis the Menace. You know, he was like this Tasmanian devil, and he would just rip and tear and, you know, just cause accidents without meaning to. And he would never get frustrated. He would never yell. He would never lose his cool. He would never lose his temper. About the only thing that you would hear from him when say, "Well, your son just did such and such," he'd go, that was it. He'd just kind of shake his head and you'd hear a, you know, so, I mean, to me, this guy embodied self-control. So self-control means to be balanced and to be even-keeled and to be consistent. And that's really hard in this day and age is to have consistency. We see a lack of consistency in our society, whether it be our jobs or our schools or our workplaces, you know. I mean, used to, people took pride in perfect attendance. And man, if they were on death's door, they would drag themselves in. I'm here, I'm at work, you know. But now it's like if the Super Bowl or, you know, the Grey Cup, people will be absent from work or school the next day. What a coincidence. Attendance is down. Gee, I wonder what happened last week, you know, over the weekend or something. So we see a lack of consistency in our society. So we need self-control more than ever before. And we see on the news all these riots and all these protests and violent ones, you know, where people's opinions just clash. And, you know, I say that we can agree to disagree agreeably. I may not agree with your political stance or maybe your doctrinal stance on something minor, but you'll see people that they just are at each other's throats because of an opinion. One of the issues today that you see a lot of violence and a lot of emotion come out is the issue of abortion. And a lot of the pro-lifers, if you go through Facebook, you'll see a lot of videos of pro-lifers being punched or kicked or attacked because they're just out there trying to save babies' lives. And so self-control is a major issue that we need to consider in our day and age and apply to our lives. So the further implication and definition of this word temperance and self-control, it means to be disciplined in training. To be disciplined in training. So I would like to think of it as kind of God's version of the Armed Special Forces or SEAL Team 6. We know that SEAL Team 6 or the Green Berets, they are an elite military unit. They have trained for years, and they've become masters in different weapons and different fighting techniques and hand-to-hand combat and strategy and warfare of many different kinds. I mean, they're really smart guys. And so when things get really tough or there's a really sticky situation, they will drop the Green Berets or the SEAL Team 6 in to, execute a mission or a plan or to, get a hostage out of a bad situation. And so they know exactly what to do in almost any and every situation. They've trained for virtually every contingency that's out there. So whatever scenario somebody can dream up in their head, they've probably already thought about it and put a plan in place. This is what we're going to do. And you see this discipline and training also in martial arts, where people just have these lightning reflexes. And I mean, you've seen this in the original Karate Kid movie. I know I brought that up a couple weeks ago, but when Mr. Miyagi told Daniel-san to paint the fence, he's like, I don't understand what you mean, paint the fence. And he threw a punch and automatically he blocked it. He didn't even think it was a reflex. He blocked it. And he made that move of paint the fence and block that punch. He didn't even think it was just a reaction. And so that's what self-control is. It's just being honed and being disciplined. Now, 1 Corinthians 9:25 says, everyone who competes exercises self-control. So we're talking about sports. We're talking about Olympics, track and field, wrestling, whatever. Everyone who competes exercises self-control in everything. In everything. Not just what they're competing for. Canada, we have a lot of gold medalists that are figure skaters. And they get up early in the morning at the crack of dawn to drive sometimes hours to get to a special facility to where they skate and train and practice all these jumps and moves and flips and all this stuff that you see so beautifully on the ice. But that's not all there is to figure skating and ice skating and competing in that arena. They have a special diet. They can only eat certain things and they have a very regimented schedule and they go to sleep at a certain time and wake up at a certain time. Every single aspect of their life is disciplined. There's a self-control in every aspect of their life. It's not just figure skating. It's not just, the physical activity. It goes diet and dress and the way they spend their time, everything. So everyone who competes exercises self-control in everything. They do it to receive a perishable crown. Now, back in the day, in Paul's time, whenever there was a sporting event or Olympics or some sort of contest, the people were competing for a crown that was made of leaves. And sometimes we see this, where it's just that crowny leaf that kind of goes around. And we know that only lasts for so long. Lasts for a couple weeks at best. And then it wilts and gets brown and dries up. But yet, they're training so hard and fighting so hard and being so disciplined in order to get that perishable crown that's just going to be gone in a few weeks. But yet, that crown, it's not just that they're competing for the crown. They're competing for bragging rights. They're competing for a reputation. They're competing for dominance and for power. And so they carry that title with them of champion until the next event, maybe a year later or 4 years later or whatever. But the crown represents something, and they receive a perishable crown, but we an imperishable crown. Every single one of us who are believers, we will get a crown in the world to come. That's kind of exciting. We're going to be ruling and reigning with Christ. There's certain scriptures that says we'll even judge angels. So we will be winners. We will be champions. We will be rulers. But these crowns, it's an imperishable crown. It's a crown of life. And these crowns we are going to cast at Jesus' feet because he is the author of life. And he deserves our allegiance and our loyalty. And so that crown, which represents who we are in Christ, and it represents the fruit of the Spirit. It represents self-control. It's what we train for. It's what we live for. It's what we discipline our lives for. Because the Christian life is a disciplined life. It's not just this, I'm a Christian by name, but I'll still go out and do whatever I want. It's a disciplined life. And we have to have self-control in issues that we have problems with. Some of it may be sexual issues. Some of it may be substance abuse issues. Some of it may be dietary issues. But we all have areas in our life that we need to practice self-control. Some of it may be issues with our attitude or with our temper. And we all need to practice this fruit of self-control. Now, it's kind of funny because what Paul says that they do this to receive a perishable crown, but we an imperishable crown. So just think of what goes into an Olympic event. We have Olympics every 4 years, is that correct? Every 4 years. So 4 years probably 6 days a week, maybe even 7 days a week, day in, day out, no matter what event you're talking about. You have these Olympians who are training, who put their life on hold, their social life on hold, their family life on hold. And they train for 4 years straight just for an event that lasts maybe 20 minutes at best. Think about that. 4 years of your life for 20 minutes. And I'm being generous there because a lot of these events, the 500 meter dash or the luge or whatever, it doesn't really last that long. It's just minutes. But for 4 years, they train for just those few minutes. And they sharpen their skills and hone their skills and practice self-control in order to receive a medal. Gold, silver, bronze. To be the best, to be at the top of the world. And we're competing for our master. And we ought to practice self-control and be as disciplined as the Olympians are when they're training for 4 years just for one event. We're playing the game of life. That's our event. And one day we are going to stand at the finish line. And we're going to stand before the great white throne of judgment, before God himself, and give an account for our life. Give an account for every minute of every hour of every day. Did we use our time to the very best of our ability? That's a part of being self-controlled, a part of being disciplined, a part of having temperance. It's how we deal our time. Now, some of us are more disciplined than others. Like, if you want a black and white example here, compare myself with Mike Chase. Everybody knows good old Mike Chase. Now, Mike Chase is just kind of fly by the seat of your pants, spur of the moment kind of guy. He openly admits, I have a hard time being disciplined in Bible study. I was a pastor of a church, but I wasn't a very good pastor because I didn't really go out and visit much. I didn't budget my time well because, just the way that my personality and makeup is. Now Pam will tell you, I actually have a sheet of paper that has hour by hour what I do. Because I'm all about order. One of my favorite places to shop is Office Depot. Not that I buy anything, I just like to go into Office Depot to look because it's so clean and so orderly, and the smell of that paper and printing paper, it's just, I love it. I love office supplies. I'm not a business person or anything whatsoever. I'm not in business or in an office, but I love office supplies. I love the store, because it represents discipline. So I have kind of a schedule that I go by throughout the week that lets me know where I should be and what I should do at what particular time. So my issue was flexibility because I was so rigid. So through the years, Pam can attest that I have become a little bit more laid back, a little bit more flexible in my, if I didn't do something at a certain time, I would just go off the rails because, oh my goodness, I should be doing this, but I'm not doing this right now because this got thrown in the way. So I've learned how to deal with monkey wrenches being thrown into my schedule. So I'm very prompt and very, self-disciplined in that area. But sometimes you can go a little bit too far. But Mike Chase and I, we're best buds, but we're opposites. Opposites attract. I'm way more disciplined than he is. But we all need to come to a balanced point of being disciplined because you could go too far with it like I did. And I made my wife miserable because of that. A-type personality, right? And then, you can't be on the other side of the spectrum where you're just so loosey-goosey and just, okay, we'll just take whatever comes. You got to have balance and self-control. That's where this comes in. So a lack of self-control is the crack in the door. It's the chink in the armor. And it's the weak link in the chain. So we've seen these cartoons and these TV shows where there's a door-to-door salesman, right? And they open it, yeah, can I help you? Yeah, I'm going door to door to make you this incredible offer. And right before you can shut the door, they stick their foot in that crack, right? And they use their foot as a wedge to open the door and show themselves in so they can talk about their great vacuum cleaner, right? And that's the way Satan is. He finds that chink in the armor. He finds that little crack in the door where he puts that wedge in and forces his way through. And that's what happens when there's a lack of self-control. We know that armor protects the vital organs. And I can't remember which story it was in the Bible, but there's this one story of a king that was disobedient to God. And there was just this archer who was just at random, tossing arrows at random, shooting arrows at random. And it said that arrow got into the chink of his armor where he wasn't protected. Just a tiny little crack. And the arrow went through and he bled to death in his chariot and he died that night. And that's what Satan looks for. He looks for the weak spots. He looks for the chinks in the armor, the cracks in the door. And I don't know if you've had experience with chains, but a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And whatever that weak link is, boy, that's a tongue twister. You break it, it'll break apart at that weak point. So that's what Satan is looking for, and that's why self-control is so important in our Christian life, because it seals the crack, it seals the door, it makes that weak link very strong. So I would, now let me kind of give you an example. I try to be a very open and transparent person. And so sometimes I tell stories to my own shame. Because you know what? I figure that my mistakes can help somebody else that's battling in that area. I have a little video series on my personal YouTube channel called Raw Confessionals. So if you want to know the dirt in my life, go to the Raw Confessionals, and you can, because I talk about my problems. I talk about my weak areas and how God deals with me of that. Now, I used to have a very bad temper. The Shoemakers were well known for our temper. I had a cousin, and they called him the GOAT. Why did they call him the GOAT? Because he had a signature move in bar fights. Whenever he got in a bar fight, he would just put his head down and ram the guy. So they called him the GOAT. He looked like a goat too because he had a big beard. When I was little, I thought I was related to Grizzly Adams. You remember Grizzly Adams back on the TV in the 70s? He looked just like him, and I thought, wow, my cousin is Grizzly Adams. Well, come to find out he wasn't, but so they called him the GOAT, and he had this big beard. But Shoemakers have been known for our temper. And I remember one time that I lost my temper. I didn't just lose my temper. I went into a rage. And I lost totally everything of self-control. And when that happens, it's almost like an out-of-body experience that you have. I had my conscience, my mind, my spirit, if you will. It's almost as if I was standing outside my body watching myself go off the rails. I'm sitting here yelling and screaming and throwing stuff and banging on stuff and foaming at the mouth and just acting like a crazy person. But yet inside myself, I'm like, shut up, stop, quit, stop doing it. But it's like I lost self-control. I wouldn't even listen to myself. And the Lord spoke to me in that moment about self-control. Because when you lose it and go off into a rage, you've let something else take control of you. It was like I was standing outside myself, yelling at myself to quit and stop because my conscience knew what I was doing was wrong. But it's like I couldn't help myself and I couldn't stop myself. And we see the same thing happen to people that has issues with drugs and alcohol and has sexual addictions and has problems with rage, problems with attitudes. Now, I want to turn and read a verse from 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. In verse 5. Now this is talking about a husband and wife situation. And it's talking about sexual chastity. It's talking about sacrificing intimacy with your spouse in order to get closer to God, to pray and to fast. And so it's talking about self-control. And so it says, do not deprive one another, except when you agree for a time to devote yourself to prayer. Then come together again, otherwise Satan may tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Because of your lack of self-control. Also, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13 is kind of like the solution to this self-control issue. It says, no temptation. Losing self-control sometimes is a temptation. No temptation has come upon you except what is common to humanity. But God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation, losing your temper, falling off the wagon and getting drunk, running around on your spouse, He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation, He will also provide a way out, so that you may be able to bear it. So whenever you're in a temptation, your responsibility is look for the escape hatch. Look for the exit door. Classic biblical example, Joseph, 17 years old, young, strapping, handsome, young Hebrew man, a slave in the house of Potiphar. And his wife, Potiphar's wife, was not getting her needs met in a marital way, if you know what I'm saying. And so she started making eyes towards Joseph. And out of all the servants, she thought, I can have this secret side affair with Joseph. My husband doesn't have to know. Nobody has to know. And when you're 17, remember when you're 17, especially the guys, that's when the hormones are raging, right? So it was a temptation because Joseph said, hey, I'm a slave in Egypt. I've been treated badly by my brothers and been sold into slavery. I deserve a little something. I deserve a little pleasure, a little enjoyment. Sure, we can keep this a secret on the side. I can get in good with Potiphar's wife and nobody ever has to know. She's definitely not going to tell her husband. So it was definitely a temptation because there was a little bit of intrigue, a little mystery, a little power, a little reputation, a little usurpation of authority of his master. Nobody wants to be a slave. But yet he loved God more than he desired the desires of the flesh. He put God and his word first and above everything, his dedication to God. And secondly, he put the dedication to his master. Because when he was approached, he says, how can I sin against God? How can I sin against my master? Yeah, I'm a slave and it's a bad situation, but I've got it good here because Potiphar has put me in charge of everything. I'm like second in command in Potiphar's house. I make every decision except what he eats. So I've got enough power, I've got enough privilege, I've got enough reputation. He's kept nothing from me except you, and rightly so. I can't do this against God. I can't do this against my master. So one time when all the servants were out of the house, and it was her and Joseph all alone, he's going about his business, minding his own business, she grabbed a hold of his clothes and said, come to bed with me, sleep with me. And what did he do? He practiced that self-control, and he slid right out of that jacket and ran. That was his undoing because she used that garment against him saying, he tried to rape me and he got away, but I grabbed his coat. So it was a total setup. But here, Joseph looked for that escape hatch. Joseph looked for that exit door. Even though it cost him something, it all paid off in the end because at the end of the story, he becomes second in command of Egypt. And his brothers bow down to him, fulfilling the dreams he had when he was a small boy. So no temptation has come upon you except what is common to humanity. But God is faithful, and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation, he will also provide a way out so that you may be able to bear it. You may be able to stand up under it. Now, like patience and like long-suffering, self-control is a trait like a muscle that one develops and is trained and tested. As they say, no pain, no gain. Self-control is like that muscle reaction, that instinct reaction that you get trained for, whether you're in special forces or in martial arts. Now, the King James word for self-control is temperance. Temperance. And that is a metallurgical term, if you will. It's a term that's used by blacksmiths. It's a term that's used by people who forge weapons and knives and swords. And today, I brought me a sword. This is a sword of swords. Does anybody know what this is? Pizza cutter. A pizza cutter. It's a giant pizza cutter. It's a giant bottle opener. No, this is a Klingon batleth. Yes, you hired a nerd for a pastor. I'm a Trekkie. I'm a Star Trek nerd, right? I'm a Trekker. So the Klingons are an alien race, and this is the sword of Kalis. Kalis was the equivalent to the Klingons' Messiah. So this is one of the most desirable weapons to have as a Klingon, right? And this is a sword made out of metal. It's a Klingon sword. But how did this beautiful piece of artwork get made? It was first an ingot. And what an ingot is just a slab of raw material, a slab of raw metal. And what they would do is they would heat this and heat it until it glowed. Then they would take it out of the furnace, and they would take a hammer and an anvil, and they would beat that piece of metal to conform into the shape that they wanted. And ever so often, they would put that hot metal, after forging it for so long, to cool it in water. And that cooling process develops temperance within the metal. The heat causes the impurities to be burned out and to come to the surface and to be beat out. And the cooling it in water made it temperate. And so what the goal of tempering is not rigidness, because if this metal was too rigid, I would go for a blow against another batleth or another sword, and it would crack and it would break. It would become brittle. If something is too rigid, it becomes brittle. So the goal is flexibility. That's what temperance is. Temperance self-control, balance, even keeled. You want to have a balance within the makeup of this metal to where it's not too hard, but yet not too soft. Because if it's too soft and it took a hit, there would be a chink and a dent in the metal. You want it to be able to stand up against combat and warfare. And I've seen swords in slow motion. Like when they're, a lot of times there's these shows that highlights different swords and weaponry. And they'll have these pigs, these cadavers of these pigs, because it represents, it's as close as you can come to a human body. And they'll show in slow motion these swords cutting through these pigs, and you would think the sword would be solid. But actually the sword has some give and have some bend. And it bends a little bit, but yet it successfully cuts through that pig. And so that's what you're looking for in metal. And that's what self-control is. It's being tempered. So temptations are a necessary part of becoming self-controlled. Temptations are a necessary part of being forged in that spiritual fire to where you can be the best that you can be. Because that temptation process is the heating process and the hammering process of the metal and the cooling process to make you temperate, to make you self-controlled, to make you balanced. The Wikipedia definition of temperance or tempering is a heat treatment technique applied to various alloys, such as steel or cast iron, to achieve a greater toughness by decreasing the brittleness and hardness of the alloy. So hardness is not the goal, but flexibility. Now, a lot of times you'll hear stories about drunk drivers. And it's usually the sober person that gets injured or the sober person that gets killed. Why is that? Because when you're drunk, it's like you're flexible. So when that car crash happens and somebody's awake, sober, and vigilant, they brace for impact. And that bracing causes a rigidity which causes the injuries in the brakes. But a drunk person will go with the flow of the accident and they'll be like a rag doll and they'll come out with hardly any injuries a lot of times. And trees. When trees go through a storm, which trees are the ones that are standing? Sometimes it's not the mighty oak, as you might think. A lot of times the mighty oak is pulled up by the roots or broken in half. It's the pine tree. It's the cedar tree. It's the palm tree. It's the soft woods. They're rigid and hard enough because they're wood, but they're flexible enough to go with the wind. The willow tree. Because you've seen in hurricanes where the palm tree is almost bent vertically, right? But yet after the storm, it goes right back up in place because it's flexible. It's temperate. And that's the way we need to be. We have to have that balance of a little bit of toughness and rigidity and a little bit of flexibility, and we need to marry those two so that we can become like a sword. Because we're all in a battle. We're all in spiritual warfare. We're all fighting the enemy, and we wrestle not against flesh and blood, which means I'm not your enemy. You're not my enemy. Whenever we have problems and disagreements, we're not fighting each other. We're fighting against those spirits that are trying to work within us. Because if Satan is going to try to take down this church, he's not going to do it from some kind of outside organization or force. We can stand up against that. Who are they? Who cares? They're not a part of us. It doesn't bother us. No skin off our nose. He's going to try to use each and every one of us against each other because we disagree on a doctrine or we disagree on maybe the direction the church needs to go or something of that nature. And he's going to try to get us to backbite and to fight against each other. But we've got to maintain self-control. We've got to be temperate. We've got to be tough, but we've got to be flexible at the same time and realize that our disagreements are really peripheral. As long as we believe on the cardinal things of scriptures, that's what counts. And as long as we have love and mercy and understanding, that's what counts. And that we can have forgiveness for each other and reconciliation with one another, that's what counts. And that's what a lot of self-control is really all about. Proverbs 16:32 says, "He who is slow to anger, or he who is patient, is better than power, and controlling one's emotions than capturing a city." You know, when you see cities captured and taken over, that's pretty impressive. But somebody who can control their temperament, somebody who has self-control is greater and more powerful than some warrior that can take over a city. So self-control or temperance implies brain over brawn. You know the difference, right? Like sometimes, like I'm not a very patient person when it comes to mechanical stuff. And Gerald could almost tell on me. We delivered a deep freeze this past week, and we couldn't get it through the door. We actually had to take the door off the hinges. And Gerald says, well, brother, how patient are you? I said, when it comes to this stuff, brother, I don't have any patience. You might hear your pastor say things he shouldn't say. So you'll have some blackmail and stuff against me by the time this is over. I was able to maintain self-control. I didn't say anything I shouldn't have said. But when it comes to mechanical stuff, building stuff, doing stuff with my hand, I'm more of a thinker than a material guy. So I don't have much patience. Whenever we buy something that needs to be put together from Walmart or IKEA, Pam's the one who puts it together, not me, because I don't have any patience for that stuff. I want to use brawn. Okay, well, it says figure A into figure B. Well, I'm going to make this work. You know, I just ram it and make it work. I use brawn when it comes to that stuff. But really, it's brains that's going to win the battle when it comes to stuff like that. So when it comes to self-control, it's brains over brawn. It's planning over brute force. And so that's what we need to do. So at the end of every Fruit of the Spirit sermon series, I always have a challenge for the congregation. So my challenge to you is to purposely attempt something that you know frustrates you, in order to put yourself and to train yourself, to put yourself in a situation to where you have to practice self-control. If you hate slow drivers, stay behind a truck. Stay behind a slow driver. When you're at the grocery store, choose the longest line. Or me, I may have to go out and buy something and put it together myself this week. So put yourself in a situation and say, Lord, I'm not trying to tempt fate here. I'm not trying to, to push things, but I want to learn self-control. I want to be more disciplined. I want to be more self-controlled. So, Lord, I'm purposely putting myself in this situation and ask that your Holy Spirit would lead and guide me and give me the strength I need to be self-control. Because once you come out of that situation and you've achieved that self-control, you feel really good about yourself. And the next time you're in a situation like that, it becomes easier. It's not as hard to maintain that self-control. So purposely put yourself in a situation where you have to practice self-control in an area that you need to work on. All right, let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that everything that you want us to know, everything that we need for our well-being, everything that we need to make us more like Christ, more like Messiah, is found in your word. Lord, give us an excitement and a zeal and a hunger and a thirst for purity, holiness, and righteousness in your word, to have a more deeper, more personal, more intimate relationship with you. May we wake up in the morning and our first thought be with you. May when we put our head on the pillow at night, our first thought be of you. That, Lord, we can't wait to fellowship with you in the morning. We can't wait to pray to you at night. We can't wait to share the gospel and the truth and the hope that we have within us with somebody in our life during our day, whether it be at work or at school or just running errands, that you would bring situations to us, Lord, that we can be able to share your word. And Lord, this week we ask that you would help us with the challenge of becoming more disciplined, becoming more self-controlled, becoming more temperate, becoming more even-keeled. And I pray, God, that you would allow situations to come into our path where we have to initiate and practice self-control. And may your Holy Spirit bring that to our mind to say, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be working on self-control this week. I'm not going to lose it with this situation that I'm being put in. I'm going to use it to the glory of God. And that, Lord, that we would depend on you to help us to learn how to be self-controlled. Help us, Lord, to apply the fruit of the Spirit to our lives, that we might become more like Christ in what you would want us and have us to. Lord, we love you and we praise you, and we ask these things in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Abraham'sDescendants.com, getting back to the first century in a 21st century way.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to press the like button as well as the subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and the notification bell that'll let you know every time I make a new video. And don't forget to share this with a friend. Also, visit our website at Abraham'sDescendants.com. Thanks. Shalom.
Thanks for watching. Stay connected by subscribing to our other social media accounts and visiting our website at Abraham'sDescendants.com.